Welcome to the Lean Podcast, where empowerment and alignment come together. I'm your host, Mahogany, here to guide you through inspiring stories of resilience, overcoming grief, health challenges, career struggles, and more. Together, we'll lean into strength, embrace growth, and discover the power of sharing experience. Before we dive into today's episode, I'd like to start with a prayer. If you feel comfortable, I invite you to join me. Dear God, thank you for this space to uplift, inspire, and empower. Bless the woman sharing her story today and those who are listening. May this podcast be a source of hope, healing, and alignment with your purpose for our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So today we have with us Miss LaNell Wilborn-Brooks. She is a mom of 2, a grandma of 6, and a great-grandmother of 7. She is also an evangelist living in Salem, Oregon. Help me welcome Miss Wilborn-Brooks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. So as we all know, the purpose of today is to hear Miss Wilborn-Brooks' story in hopes that it inspires and uplifts someone going through their own struggles. Today, our topic is childhood. She's going to take us through her childhood and explain to us her achievements and lessons learned. So how are you doing today?
I am excellent and adorable.
Awesome. I am so excited that my grandmother is on my podcast, y'all. So we are going to start by having you explain to us a little bit about your childhood. Just kind of walk us through from what you remember from birth.
Okay. I was born and raised in Wichita Falls, Texas. It was a small, and I think it still is, just a small, segregated community. And I loved it. I love having the community. I love all the Blackness. I just love it. Was small and intimate. And I am the oldest of seven. I have 6 siblings, and my mother and father. I was raised with my mother and father, so I was really blessed for that. I was raised in the church. We went to church every Sunday and Sunday school and Bible study. And I was also the babysitter of my siblings. My next sister was 5 years younger, and then they go down 2 years from there. And I was surrounded with love and my aunts and uncles, and just really knew the neighborhood. I loved my childhood. I didn't realize how poor we were until I was grown. That's really awesome. So.
Oh, wow. So you didn't even realize that you guys were struggling financially. At what point did you start to realize that you guys were lacking financially?
I think when I became a teenager, and because we always had a good meal, we lived in a nice, clean area, home. Um, I was fed, and I think when I realized it, when my father left the home when I was a teenager, he left the home and went to California and left the 7 of us. Yeah, the 7 of us in Wichita Falls, Texas. And I don't like to say had to, but I had an opportunity to go to work. I was 14 years old, and I was able to go to work in the summer program working in the post office. And I thought all that money was going to go to me, and I had to give it to the household
Mhm.
to help my mother and my siblings. And I think that's when I realized that we were poor. And then as I grew up more as a teenager, when my mother started buying my clothes at Salvation Army. Uh, and I said, "What's going on here?" And I was not a nice teenager. I was a mean teenager. I wouldn't even wear the clothes that my mother sacrificed to buy for me because I was the oldest. And I would put them in the closet and not wear them. And that kind of haunts me today, how mean I was. But yeah, I think that's when I first realized how poor we were.
Oh, wow. Yes, that's definitely a blessing that you didn't even realize that y'all were lacking. So that's a blessing in itself.
Yeah.
Tell us
Hmm.
how your relationship was with your siblings. I know you had that 5 age gap from your next sibling down. So what was your relationship like with them? Was it more like a parenting or more like a sibling love, or how was it?
It was more parenting, babysitting, directing them, making sure they got to school, making sure they got to, in the summer, got to camp, uh, dressing them. And the relationship was strictly that. I don't really remember any fun times that we had, like playing on a playground or riding bikes or anything like that. I don't have any memory of that. Just discipline. And you know what? That's how it is today. I've lost two siblings, but the ones that are alive, they still see me as the boss. I'm the boss, and especially now that my mom is gone on. Um, I I'm the boss. I'm the lead, and they come to me and they know it. But you know, Morgan, I don't abuse that. I don't abuse it because I know I have that power, and I kind of like it that they depend on my suggestions and my help still, and they are grown people.
That's a
Yeah.
lovely thing. I'm also the oldest child, and I definitely feel like that authoritative figure is always over them to some capacity, where they don't want to
Hmm.
be disrespectful or anything like that. Wow.
Hmm.
What emotions did you feel growing up? What emotions really stick out to you of how you felt as a child into adolescent age? What was a normal
Oh,
moment mood
okay.
for you?
Yeah, I grew up hearing the words "you're special." You can do anything you want, and the sky's the limit. And those are the words I heard most of my life. You can do anything. You're special and important. That's what I heard all my life. Hmm.
Wow. So you felt a lot that you were special and you stood out.
Hmm.
Wow. Tell us
Yeah.
about your
Yeah.
high school time. Like, were you popular? Were you the kid who was picked on? Were you picking on
Hmm.
people? Or what was that like?
Oh, well, I had a great um, uh, grade school, middle school, and high school. In high school, I was very popular. I was cute. I was small. I had big legs, big hairy legs, which were very popular in the 50s and 60s. I was really cute and I was popular with the boys. I was very popular. I remember in high school, we in the hallway when we were going from class to class, the boys would line up in front of the lockers and they would always call out my name and whistle at me. And I remember that I was on the cheerleader team. I was very active in volleyball. I loved volleyball, gym. And I went to parties. We used to have house parties, and I was always invited to the house parties in the community. And I just had a wonderful teenage life. I really did. I had we had cliques. We didn't know they were cliques back then, but we did have cliques in high school. And I ran with cute girls, popular girls. And we didn't let nobody in. We were terrible. Like I said, I was a terrible teenager. And there was about five of us. And then each of five of us had friends as boys. They weren't our boyfriends, but so we had a team, or you might even call it not a gang, but it was clique. It was definitely a clique. And we wouldn't let anyone in. We didn't allow anyone who were smokers anything like that. We had our own little clique, and we kind of strutted our stuff. Yeah.
Wow. And was this during segregation? Like
Yes,
when you were
this
in
was
high
in the.
school?
Mhm. So I was born in 1952. And so going going into the 60s, 1960s, we got into segregation and our little world fell apart. I was in the 11th grade Well, I left school. I left school to have my daughter at 16 years old. I left school and had her, the love of my life, and my late husband. And so I left school. He left school, and in the 11th grade, and then segregation happened in the 12th grade, which we were not there, but we heard about what segregation did. They closed down our school, which was Booker T. Washington High School. They closed our school and bused our kids over to the white neighborhood. And so that was very devastating to the neighborhood, but I wasn't a part of that, but I heard about it because my husband and I and our baby moved to Seattle and started our family in Seattle, Washington. Yeah,
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
quite the story to live during those times, but y'all left all together, so you didn't have to really experience it firsthand on what that was like.
Mhm,
Wow. Well,
mhm,
tell us, I know there's something special about your birth and how you were conceived. And I know a lot of women who may have come from similar backgrounds may not feel that they can get through life and have a prosperous life past that.
mhm.
Could you explain to us a little bit about that and how old you were and what you had found out and things like that?
Sure. I remember I said that all my life I heard that you're special and you can do anything you want to. The sky's the limit. Even in the midst of being poor and having lack in the home. I always heard that all my life. And so, not that I'm better than anyone, but I just felt special all growing up. And at 17 years old, I found out that my mother gave birth to me when she was 14 years old. And as a result of a rape from her stepfather. And I was the result of that. And through all of that, I still heard you're special. And my mother, okay, now we have a 14-year-old girl pregnant. So, she's still at home with her mother and her siblings. And how God spared me from all of that ugliness. Um, my grandmother loved me so much. I love my grandma. I felt love. My siblings, slash aunts and uncles, because my oldest uncle was 10 years old when I was born. So from 10 years on down, we were all in the same house. And here my 14-year-old mother with a baby and the dynamics of that. But I never felt it. It's crazy how I never felt it. And when my grandmother told me how I was conceived, it kind of upset me at first. And being sassy, I called my mother because I would have moved to Wichita Falls with my grandmother at 17, because I gotten pregnant and we stayed in Texas, and so I was living with my grandmother, and she told me. So I called my mother and called myself, sass my mother, why you didn't tell me this and da 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 da, and of course she put me in my place, and then I had a conversation with my grandmother and just wondered why she told me at this time. And I can't even remember. And I was a bit upset with my grandmother, but I loved my grandmother so much. There was nothing she can do wrong. There was nothing my grandmother could do wrong. So I got over that. But because I grew up and didn't hear about it till 17, it shook me a little bit, but I was able to continue all because of my beginnings. I think if I would have heard in that household negative things about my mother, can you imagine? And they might have been going on, but I never heard it. My grandmother put her husband out of the home when, found out he had raped my mother. Can you imagine that? But I was sheltered from that. So what I want to say is that what our children hear when they're little is how they can grow up, good or bad. So I was blessed to only hear positive things surrounding my world, versus it could have been very ugly. Um, and I'm sure it was pretty tough for my mother at a certain age, because I remember her moving to Detroit, away from Wichita Falls. She took me and we went to Detroit because I remember living there. And that was good. I had a good time in Detroit with my aunts and my cousins. But we moved back to Texas, and I must have been, not a long time. And so I don't know how my mother continued to raise me. I know she got married at 16. Yes, I do. She got married at 16 years old to an airman in Wichita Falls. So she met him, got married. I was 2 years old at that point. And so he took me in and loved me even more. So my stepfather, of course, I didn't know all that. I didn't know all these terms. All I knew was a man who loved me and raised me. So my message is make sure we say kind, gentle things to children because they can grow up damaged. They could grow up damaged. So I'm blessed that I heard only positive things.
Oh, wow. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. You're so right.
Mhm.
That could have been horrible breeding grounds for disaster for a child
Mhm.
growing up and for you to get all that love from your grandmother,
Mhm.
especially, and then your mother too, and everyone else.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
what are some lessons that you learned in your childhood that have helped you raise your children, your grandchildren, and now your great grandchildren?
hmm my late husband and I, we moved from Texas. Well, I had another baby at 19. So I had two babies at 19. So I had Sabrina and James, who are two years apart. And so we moved to Oregon. And the reason we moved to Oregon was my mother. Remember, I told you she had moved to California, and my late husband's mother had moved to Washington. So we call ourselves getting in between them. So we moved to Oregon. He chose Oregon. And so we were still young, 20, 21 years old, living in Oregon. And I don't know if anybody know anything about Oregon, but Oregon is very cliquish. It's not very many African Americans, not diverse at all, especially in the 70s. And we moved in 1973. And so moving there with two babies, uh, remember, I didn't finish high school, nor did my late husband. So we moved to Oregon to a place that we had no idea how segregated and how racist it was. It was really racist. And so moving to Oregon, trying to look for a house, for an apartment, because we just packed up our trailer and moved to Oregon with our two babies. And looking in Salem for an apartment, there was vacancies because they would have a big sign on the building, vacancy. And so uh, my husband would go up, late husband would go up to the building and ask for an application. Could we get an application for this apartment? And they would say, oh, it's just rented. And we did that for, I think a good 2 weeks. No one would rent to us, to him going up. And so James would say, well, now why don't you try go up and knock on the doors? Maybe they'll be more receptive to you. And so when I started going up with my babies, my two babies, knocking on the door, asking for an application, we had to do a couple, but eventually someone gave us an application and we were able to get an apartment. We had no idea that that was the ghetto of Salem, Oregon. We didn't know. We were just happy to be in an apartment. So we started our little life in Salem, Oregon. But again, it was my attitude about who I am. And if I hadn't had that background and that foundation, I would have just probably given up and we would have went on back to Texas. But I was persistent. And so as my two children grew up, I instilled that in them. Even though they were surrounded with prejudice, we would go places to a restaurant and all places, and people would stare at us. And I remember they would always touch their hair and wanted to pay attention to them, and they didn't like it. And so I remember my daughter saying, she was in grade school, she said, Mom, why do they always look at us when we walk into the room? And I said, well, how does that make you feel? They're just looking. So I don't like for them looking at me. I don't like them touching. I said, what you have to know is that you are special. You are beautiful. And they are looking at you because you're beautiful, nothing negative. And that is what I drilled in them, that you are somebody. They're looking because you are unique and you are wonderful. And so my two kids grew up in Salem feeling that they're somebody and they're special. Whereas if I would have said, again, been negative, yeah, there's a lot of racism. People, don't like Black people. I didn't do that. I drilled in the positive in them. Yeah.
Wow, that is
Mhm.
beautiful. I love that. What advice
Mhm.
would you give someone who had a horrible childhood? I know that's not your life, but what advice would you give someone who had a horrible childhood trying to overcome that as an adult and just have a good life that they're proud of?
Mhm. I would suggest that they find somebody in their life that they could talk about their feelings, because that's one key thing. People don't want to talk about their feelings. They keep it inside, and they grow up with that bitterness or shame or low self-esteem or whatever it is. So I would suggest they find someone that they can trust, and be open and candid and transparent, where they're not going to be judged at all about what they did or how they feel. And I would say start there, because yes, we have God to help us through these emotions and everything, but we need a live body to help us through these lifelong tragic things that we've had. And then once you develop that friendship and relationship, go from there. It could be a mentor, it could just be a friend, it could be um, anybody that you can trust, and share those feelings. Because I'm sure a lot of times people have kept them in. We have 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old women who still have trouble with their mama and daddy in life. They never overcame it. And so, yeah, that would be my suggestion, to find someone to let all of that out. Yeah.
Yes, you got to get it out. You can't just hold it in,
Mhm.
battle with it. Wow, this has been absolutely amazing. Do you have any closing remarks that you would leave with our listeners?
I would suggest that our listeners who feel good about yourself and you have a positive life, share that with others. Be willing to share. Those who are not that way, maybe have low self-esteem, who are bitter and feeling all the negative things, come up with words that describe you, even if it's a stretch. Identify who you are and say I am, and just make a list of who you see you are. As if I make a list of myself, I say I am, I persevere, I'm consistent, I'm strong, I'm smart. We don't compliment ourselves like that, and women don't compliment each other. I don't know what it is. A lot of times we don't compliment each other, but preach your own message to yourself. Just make a list of who you are, and then love yourself, and just love people too is a key. Even though you're hurting, because hurting people hurt people. Just try to get in a spot where you're not hurting and you're loving. And I guarantee you, you will reap the benefits of loving yourself, yourself, family, community, church, whatever. That's the key. Love being the foundation.
Wow, so powerful. Thank you so much for those words. I'm definitely going to go through and do that practice myself as well. All right, y'all. So
Mhm.
this was our episode for today. We went through Mrs. Wilborn-Brooks's life as a child. We went through her adolescent teen years. She stuck through desegregation. She raised kids as a teen mom and found out some heavy news about her own birth as a young woman and still persevered. So we hope today's episode encourages you and lets you know that you do not have to look like what you've been through. So we thank you.
Hallelujah.
We thank you again so much for being here, and we can't wait to talk to you again on another episode.
Thank you for having me, Mahogany.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Lean. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired, empowered, and ready to take on whatever challenges come your way. If this conversation resonated with you, make sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. And don't forget to share it with someone who could use a little extra encouragement. The Lean podcast thrives because of listeners like you. So let's continue to build this community.
Drop a comment, leave a review, and let us know what topics you'd love to hear more about. And if you haven't yet, be sure to join our Facebook group, the Ladies Empowerment and Alignment Network, where the conversation and support continues every day. Until next time, keep leaning into growth, empowerment, and alignment. Thanks for being a part of the Lean community.